both the mushrooms and the CBD stimulate the same membrane receptors to produce the same tryptophan response. So that's where we see that there's an even more profound response when you use both together.
Hey, I'm Dr. Ruth Roberts, the original holistic pet health coach, and I am so delighted because Dr. Rob Silver is with me today. We're going to try to get you some information on how to have a chill holiday season for your pet. Dr. Rob is a fountain of knowledge, but more recently, he has turned his attention to those incredible functional fungi, and indeed, he is the chief veterinary officer for Real Mushrooms. And if you don't know Doc, he's an OG. So he's been around since 1982 from Colorado State University's veterinary medicine, received a master's degree in cardiopulmonary physiology in 76, and bachelor's degree in animal science in 74, also from CSU. So Colorado through and through. He's currently an adjunct faculty member of both the Chi University and at Lincoln Memorial University's College of Veterinary Medicine. Dr. Silver established one of the first integrative veterinary hospitals in the U.S. in Boulder, Colorado in 1993, and sold the practice in 2010 so that he could focus his time on and energy on postgraduate education, health coaching, and veterinary product development. He also runs the Well Pet Dispensary and a blog site that he shares with integrative equine vet and a boarded veterinary rehabilitator at Nurse Your Pet. And he is truly considered one of the few experts in veterinary cannabis. He authored the groundbreaking book of Medical Marijuana and Your Pet. And his new book, which has just come out, is called There's a Mushroom for That. And really, what he's done is take a wealth of knowledge on cannabis and mushrooms and combined those two things together to get you, the pet parent, more information. It is a fantastic book. I'm going to drop a link to it in Amazon if I can get it to not have all this crazy stuff going on there. So let's see if this will work for us. But it's an amazing book. And if you're looking for knowledge about how to use mushrooms and cannabis together, this is an amazing place to start. Dr. Rob, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. And it's nice I'm starting to, I've always thought of myself as an old timer, but I think being called OG is a little bit kinder.
The youngins know what that means.
Yeah, well, and I'm learning too. But anyway, thank you for that introduction. It's great to be here today, and I'm really looking forward to having this chat with you and providing information that may be helpful for all the people out there who have pets, who are getting excited about our holidays. Everyone's getting excited about the holidays. It's about time we had a little fun, and
yeah, exactly.
But we want to make sure everybody's chill, everybody's happy, that we don't have any kind of inappropriate things happen that may lead to trips to the ER or just problems in general. So.
Amen to that. Speaking of that, what are the biggest things you think that pet parents are dealing with in terms of stress and all of that kind of stuff, especially during the holidays?
I think, for one, our pets are really reflections of ourselves. They're little mirrors, aren't they? And I think things these days in terms of the news, the world events, everything like that is pretty stressful for us, for many of us, I know, for myself certainly, and my household. And our animals cannot help but be affected by that. And I guess my big overriding message before we get to all the supplements and things that might be helpful is that we need to also find that center of calmness in ourselves in order to allow our pets not to feed off of our own anxiety and excitement. And so I always think of pets as being our little teachers, and that they present us with these problems that we have to solve that really start with ourselves, and then we can extend them out to our pets. But I think when it comes to the holidays, certainly the excitement of having family and friends show up, the anticipation of some time off from work, and maybe if you're a sports advocate, all the sports that we have available then. I think these are the sorts of things that get people's excitement ramped up. But anytime excitement about good excitement gets ramped up, it also can bring with it some anxiety as well. So I think the things that we want to look at include how we bring our guests into the household, how we introduce them into the household, because that can be a stressful to our critters. I think how we handle the cooking process and the feeding process. I think we have to look at, rather than dealing with things ad hoc when the door starts opening and the guests start coming in, we should think about this a few days in advance as far as how we want to stage things to keep things on the chill level for our critters.
That's great advice, and it's funny. It's every conversation I've been having recently. We're with regardless of who I'm speaking with, it's like, how can we look within to start solving the problem, which I think is just beautiful. Having said all of that, then I think one of the other things that it's really critical to do is to be able to plan ahead. And I think staging things, that's a great way to put it. But one of the other things might be to create like a safe space or an escape route for a pet. So how would you go about doing that?
That is what I was alluding to when I was saying staging things. For instance, maybe it's better to have the pets in the backyard when the company comes in, because there's something about that front door and the doorbell ringing and people coming in, and our pets have a job. They're supposed to be protecting our household and letting us know that people are there. And so that also helps to get things going with them. And something that we know, for instance, with pain, we know that with pain, there's something that we call wind up, which means that as the pain starts to be getting greater, it starts to get to a place where it almost takes on a life of its own. And we know that with pain management, if we can somehow intervene before that pain starts getting wound up, that we have a much better chance of remediating the pain than if we wait until they're really in severe pain and we're doing whatever we can. It's obvious how painful they are and we have to do something. Same thing with anxiety. Anxiety tends to wind up, and if we can intervene early, we can make a difference. So I think supplements are great, but I think lifestyle and management of things is the true key to things. And supplements don't work in all critters, but managing the household can. So, for instance, maybe having the animals outside and then waiting until we have most of our company in the house, and then bringing the animals in one at a time and introducing them to the people in a way that makes the guest be accepted by the animals because they're being introduced by the household, by the heads of the household, that sort of a thing. I think that's a good way to help reduce that. Or if you're in an apartment, you don't have an outside, maybe you've got a room that you could put the animals in where they could stay there for a bit. Now, I will talk about things that we can use to reduce their anxiety before all this happens, because because of wind up, we don't want to start giving them stuff when they're already anxious. We want to give it way before. But that would be staging as far as that. When there's around Thanksgiving, especially for most of the holidays, Christmas, New Year's, oftentimes there's a feast, there's some kind of food meal involved with that, even Easter. And it's not just the people sitting down and being served the food, it's all the food preparation, the stuff coming out of the refrigerator, all the things that the animals are looking at that normally in a calm day, maybe when you're fixing breakfast, you might toss a little bacon or something, and which is okay if the animal's okay with that. A little bit of anything is fine. And so we also need to look at at the circumstances around which we're preparing food, and not allow the animals to actually be present in the kitchen at the same time, because I think that also gets them wound up. There's other risks that come with the whole holiday food preparation. My favorite term for it is garbage gut, which can come, and I'm certainly not an advocate of only feeding pets nothing but one diet their whole lives and kibble. I think diversity of nutrition is really important. Some animals can handle more diversity than others, and you should know that about your own animals, whether you can give them a little treat here or not. But nonetheless, even if they're getting home prepared food or a raw diet, giving them something different than what they're used to might precipitate diarrhea or vomiting or even something worse, one of the more severe types of GI problems we see with ingesting things that animals aren't used to, or with stress. Hemorrhagic gastroenteritis, we call it HGE, oftentimes arises around a combination between stress and ingestion of foods that they're not familiar with. So I think looking at the entry of people into the household and how we introduce the pets to them in a way that keeps the excitement level down, and then also managing the kitchen. And everyone has their own household, their own circumstances, their own philosophy about how to live with their pet and how their pet lives with them. I would take my advice and modify it how it would work specifically in your own household, and in a way not just that you don't want to feel like you're putting them in jail or this, that we're trying to avoid stuff. We're just trying to manage it in a way so that the animal, think of your animals are pets. Dogs are, think of them as 3-year-olds in terms of their emotional development, their intellectual development. Some of them are probably much older than that in their intellectual development, but think of them that way emotionally, and realize treat them the same way that you would your children around the same holiday situation, in terms of giving them boundaries that help to keep them from being excessively anxious or excited around things. It's a lot.
And that makes total sense.
I'm spouting things here, but it's making sense, isn't it?
No, it is. It is absolutely. And that's the thing. I think planning and foresight are really critical to keeping these guys happier and more content during what can be a really crazy high energy time.
Yeah.
If a person knows they've got a really anxious pet and they've got the family coming over for whatever big meal it is, what are some natural remedies that folks could start thinking about for calming pets down during the holiday season, or really any of these big festivals, so to speak?
Not speaking about specific products, but just speaking about specific ingredients that can be in products. We have a number of choices available to us, and certainly looking for something as simple as a single herb like valerian root can be very calming. Or if we're dealing with cats, because cats can get we're thinking dogs a lot because they're always on our face, and oftentimes with company, cats reclude themselves somewhere. But with cats, I think the best calming herb, even though it may be a little bit paradoxical, is catnip. Catnip is, in a way, it's like alcohol for cats. They get intoxicated first, they get excited and run around, and then they chill. When I had my practice and we had cats come in, we would always put some catnip on the floor for the cats and give them some time to eat it a little bit or roll in it and get a little excited. And they chill. And I think for cats, I think catnip is a great herb to use. It's so safe. It's the first herb I learned to identify when I was learning herbal medicine. It's the first herb I learned to make a tincture out of, and treated myself when I was younger, and actually now still. I get a little bit of a nervous stomach. So when I'm talking about reducing anxiety around holidays, I'm talking about myself as well. And having learned how to use catnip, I started using it myself, and it actually calmed my stomach. It's used traditionally for colic in infants, just like chamomile is. It's very similar. And chamomile is another herb that's really wonderful to use as well. And there's passion flower. There are so many great individual herbs out there. Hops is a good herb. You have to be careful not using too much of that because it is very strong. And then, of course, there's a number of products out there. I think when we look at products for pets, the category of calming products is second only to products for arthritis and mobility. So there's a plethora of products out there. And I'll tell you, most of them probably work just fine because the supplement industry, the pet supplement industry, is getting very intelligent. They're learning, and they're really taking advantage of all the research that we now have about herbs and all the emerging new herbs coming from different ethnobotanical systems like Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine. And so there are a lot of good products out there. Talking about cannabis, for instance, and CBD. I know that's a topic that is of great interest to many people. It's an area of my own expertise. The book that Ruth was referring to doesn't just contain information about mushrooms. It also has a comprehensive amount of information about how to use cannabis, how to use CBD, the other cannabinoids, and even how to use THC in a way that's safe for your animal. And so CBD itself can be a very calming influence on a pet. Oftentimes that's all you need. Some pets are very responsive to CBD, and that's all you need. And we find with calming, with the dosages to calm for CBD, that they actually use lower dosages. So I would recommend starting at the low end of dosing with a pet. And you need to find, depending what product you're using, you need to find out what the concentration is. In other words, how many milligrams, how much CBD is in each little volume of liquid, and that should be explained to you on the label. And then we look at using a dosing recommendation. Usually I dose it based on milligrams per pound of body weight, and I recommend starting at about a quarter of a milligram for each pound of body weight, giving it twice daily. And that's a nice low dosage to start, and maybe all you need to do with it makes your bottle last a lot longer. But the best thing to do and to understand to get the best levels of that CBD is to give it with a little bit of food. If you're giving it to a dog, probably the best food to mix it in with is a little bit of cat food, because cat food's fatty. And we find that when you give the CBD with fatty food, it actually is better absorbed in the body as compared to people that are trying to tell you that you have to give it sublingually. And actually trying to get that little dropper into your pet's mouth may be a super challenge. This makes it so much easier to mix it in with the food, a little bit of canned food, and then feed them their meals. And so that would be, go ahead. Did you want to say something? I'm sorry, I don't mean to be.
Well, and that's it. I'm glad you brought that up because, and I'm sorry, I think my internet's a little dodgy. Hopefully I'm back. Yeah. Hopefully I'm back. At any rate, I'm glad you brought that up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because, yeah, there's other folks that say, oh, you can only give it sublingually. But you've told me before there are several studies that actually show that oral absorption with food is better.
Well, actually, and it's not just several studies in dogs. There are several studies in dogs, but there's also several studies in humans. There's several studies in laboratory animals like rats, and there's one or two studies in horses as well. So it works in every species, it seems like, to give it with food, and it's so much easier to do that way than trying to chase the animal around. Then you worry about the dropper tip getting contaminated by the animal's saliva. You put it back in the bottle and it contaminates the whole bottle. So this is so much easier to do. And what I recommend is not to start the morning of Thanksgiving, and not even to start the day before.
Yeah.
But to start a week before at least. And if you have an anxious animal, I would recommend giving this on a daily basis just to lower the level of anxiety. But when you have a moment of something that might be excessively stressful, then you could double or triple the dosage to get a little more in there that may actually help to reduce that. Or that might be the signal to take the CBD and add one of these calming herbs to it, or one of these calming nutraceuticals to it. For instance, the amino acid tryptophan is known to be very calming, and I use it a lot in my formulas because it's so safe. It's just a part of food, and tryptophan is a precursor. The body uses tryptophan to create the calming neurotransmitter called serotonin. And what's really cool is the more tryptophan you take, the more serotonin your body produces. It's kind of like a chemical reaction. So taking tryptophan and adding that to the CBD can be very, very strong as far as helping to calm and chill. And there's other amino acids like theanine. Is a great amino acid for calming. You may not know theanine, but if you drink green tea, you've had it many times, because theanine is what gives green tea its zen. It's very calming, it's very relaxing, it even has some anti-neoplastic, anti-cancer properties as well. So, but CBD alone oftentimes is all that you need. And I have been exploring other cannabinoids, because everyone just says, but the cannabis plant is a very rich source of multiple active ingredients in it. And certainly we have THC in there. And I'm not sure THC is so good for anxiety, because oftentimes it can cause panic attacks and tachycardia in humans. And many CBD products do contain THC, but they call those full spectrum. And oftentimes it's such a small amount of THC, it doesn't really matter in terms of precipitating anxiety. But there's another type of tincture that's called a broad spectrum. And the broad spectrum has everything in it. It has the minor cannabinoids, it has which includes CBD. It has the terpenes in it, the flavonoids, but it doesn't have the THC. And there's some dogs that are super, super sensitive to THC. There's some people that don't want to get drug tested for THC, but need the CBD for their own pain relief. And so this category of tincture is called a broad spectrum tincture. And in the early days, when they first started making them, they were crude. And in order to reduce the THC, they also chemically removed a lot of other ingredients from it. But these days, the industrial chemistry that they use for these extractions is so refined that they are able to spare most of these other delicate parts that come from the cannabis plant. And we know that when you have the whole cannabis plant with all of its ingredients, you have so much more potency than when you just have one single isolated ingredient. Like when you have the CBD isolate, it might take dosages 4 to 5 times higher than if you had the CBD within a broad spectrum or within a full spectrum product. Some companies like to brag that they're full spectrum as though that somehow is going to make them seem superior to another company. And I would say that a full spectrum and broad spectrum are superior to a single isolate. We call it isolate CBD because you need a higher dosage and we see more side effects. But if you're dosing a horse, a 1,000-pound horse, it can get pretty expensive to use a full spectrum or broad spectrum product. And that's where we see the use of the isolate working at higher doses, 250 milligrams of CBD twice a day in a horse. There was one study that came out for a very painful horse. That's a lot of CBD, not that much for a horse, but for a human, or a dog, it would be, and it could be quite costly. So that's where looking at that using the isolate works, and it's less expensive. And maybe it's not the best in terms of the full spectrum or broad spectrum, but sometimes we have to do what's practical because we can't always afford to go the Cadillac route or the gold standard route. So I'm blabbering
and that's
here.
A great point.
Yeah. I'm blabbering here a little bit. I'm sorry before you interrupt. So in terms of cannabinoids, there's another cannabinoid that a lot of people have been looking at because it's really good for anxiety. And this cannabinoid is called CBG or cannabigerol. And CBG is very closely related. CBG is actually the primary compound that then gets converted in the plant to THC and CBD. So it has properties of both. And so I found that when you have a formula that has both the CBD and the CBG in at the same time, you actually get a more profound relaxation effect than when you have a product that has only one or the other in it or small amounts of the other. So that was where I wanted to finish that, but I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, and I appreciate that. No, please. And that's why you're here, to share the information you've got. So one of the other things I keep hearing is, oh, those isolates are toxic. And I know there's a good way to do it and there's a not a good way to do it. So can you speak a little bit about how you know what your manufacturer is doing?
The only way to really know what the manufacturer is doing is to ask them for a certificate of analysis. And the certificate of analysis will include both the measurement of the potency of the active ingredients in it, like the CBD, and show you that there is THC in it, there isn't THC in it. And it also tells you, what terpenes are in there as well. But they also will do heavy metals. They'll also do solvent residues. They'll also do pesticides and herbicides. And so that's what you want to look at to see that it is, in fact, quite clean as far as what's in it. I'm in the process of remanufacturing one of my tinctures, and I have a CBG tincture. I call it the silver bullet, and I have one that's a little less potent called the sterling silver. And I was recently remanufacturing them because I was running out, and Black Friday's coming up soon. I want to make sure I'm fully in stock. And the extract that we had purchased from this company that was supposed to be broad spectrum had a ton of THC in it. It was really scary. I was really glad that part of our operating procedure is to analyze these things before we manufacture them. So we've had to find another source that meets our standards. And my products, I prefer to actually go with the broad spectrum products because I think that there are some animals and some people that are uber sensitive. And I think that for most applications for THC, because THC is great, it's a great drug. It's a good pain reliever. It has some anti-cancer properties. It's got some good anti-inflammatory properties, but its side effects are the reason why it's so difficult. And I lost my train of thought there. I'm sorry. The
Yeah, so it's great that you checked your components of your tinctures before you actually made them up. But that speaks to the depth of the importance of the COAs, because then you're going to see, is there residual hexane, is there residual dissolvents, that kind of stuff.
and so and we do that. It's an expense. We have to do that. And I when I teach this class about CBD, I always tell people to reach out to the company and ask them for the certificate for analysis. And if they hem and haw and whatever, then try to find another company, and also try to find a certificate of analysis that is the original document from the third party lab. You don't want to have a company have their own laboratory do the analysis and create their own certificate of analysis, because that's like having the fox in the hen house. Maybe you can trust it, but can you really trust it? It's much more trustable, if that's a word, having the analysis done by an independent third party lab that has been certified by the American Association of Analytical Laboratories. So you just have to, look at the details on that sheet, because oftentimes companies will make up their own pretty graphically designed C of A that you just can't trust because it's not coming from the original laboratory.
Third party. That's so true. And I think you sparked a lot of interest. Elaine was asking what would be good to put CBD tinctures in other than canned cat food.
Those are all good.
And
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I guess canned cat food doesn't have the best of optics, does it, with your group? Sorry. Yeah, I think any of these things are fine, really. If the point is to use something that the animal likes to eat, that has some fattiness to it, because what happens when you take it with fatty food is it bypasses the liver. The liver is the reason why we do this, because the CBD is very rapidly detoxified or metabolized by the liver. And if we can avoid that first pass metabolism, it'll get better blood levels. So when you give it with fat, fat's not absorbed through the normal way that nutrients are going from the intestines to the liver. Fat's absorbed by our lymphatic system. We call these the lacteals. And they're right next to the blood vessels that absorb it, but the fat goes into the lacteals, and the lacteals dump the fat and the lymph into the superior vena cava. So it bypasses the liver entirely, and this is why we get to have these elevated levels. So yeah, all of those foods were great, and certainly they're fine to use. So good question.
that's awesome. But it's interesting too. One of our coaches, Audrey Moyna, had a problem with her dog where she would try to give CBD and his liver enzymes would just skyrocket. And she'd pull the CBD out and they'd go back down. So would this strategy perhaps prevent some of that from happening, or is this just a idiosyncratic thing for her pup?
It's hard for me to speak specifically to that problem, but certainly the studies that we've done on CBD show no toxicity at all to the liver. So I think it would definitely be a situation of either the uber sensitivity of this dog's liver, maybe some pre-existing liver disease that she wasn't aware of, or a tendency to a liver disease that the CBD somehow precipitated, or more likely perhaps contamination in the product. Don't know, but that would be the two choices that I would think of. But CBD has been shown multiple times to only, it does cause one liver value to elevate, which is called alkaline phosphatase. And alkaline phosphatase is not necessarily specific to the liver with regards to the CBD effect on it. We want to see the ALT elevate if we think there's really damage being done to the liver, or GGT. But the serum alkaline phosphatase is an enzyme that we also see in bone. And so what we've learned is that CBD stimulates the osteoblasts. Osteoblasts are the bone cells that create more bone. In growing kittens and puppies, we see elevated alkaline phosphatase because their bones are actively growing. And so the thinking is now that this elevated alkaline phosphatase that we see with higher doses of CBD is actually coming from the bone and not from the liver, because we don't see any kind of impact on the liver when we do histopathology or when we look at any of the other liver enzymes. So I don't know if maybe that was the enzyme that had elevated in this dog or not, since I don't know the case.
I think it was actually both. So interestingly, she switched brands and not a problem. So that's awesome news. Yeah.
Rooted Owl. What an interesting name. Well,
Yeah,
good. I'm
it's
glad you
interesting.
yeah.
They've got an interesting product. It's one of the few in sesame oil, which has
Oh.
been an issue for some dogs that are sensitive to coconut oil. And then Jennifer's asking another, sorry, please.
No, since sesame oil was used originally with with one of the first FDA approved THC drugs out there, so as a vehicle, so it's a decent vehicle to use.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. And then Jennifer's asking if this is something that could be given, if we could use CBD for a dog with a liver shunt. And I don't have enough expertise, and I think that's a case by case.
Yeah, I think there's some small liver shunts, there's some big liver shunts, but because we know that CBD doesn't do direct damage to the liver, I don't see an issue with that. I would start with low levels initially, and I would maybe follow it up with a blood test, maybe 2 weeks, just to be sure it's safe. When you have treating a healthy animal versus treating an animal with some problem like this are different in terms of recommendations. And although I don't think that we necessarily need to avoid using these supplements in animals with disease, I think we have to measure our steps and take it slowly. Start with a low dose, recheck some of those blood values that are around that particular pathology and see if you're okay. If you think that CBD is really what you need to help this animal. And there are other ways to provide some of the same benefits that CBD provides. That's one reason I've been getting into mushrooms, because mushrooms have many of the same properties of CBD or of cannabinoids, certainly not THC in terms of the intoxication effect, but mushrooms can have a great anti-inflammatory effect. They can have a great calming and settling effect. And maybe this is the point where we want to morph into the discussion regarding mushrooms and using mushrooms for calming in your pets.
Perfect segue. And actually, Janine with Mountain Animal Rescue was actually asking about tryptophan. And you mentioned several herbs that could go along with that.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that you formulated for real mushrooms is the mushroom relax chews, which I think are just brilliant. So we can talk a little bit about that.
They certainly do work pretty well. Here's an example. If I can get it out of the glare of the light, there we go. Everything's reversed. Everything's reversed with this video platform. I'm going backwards, but yeah.
It's like
so to answer the question about tryptophan, really. Tryptophan is an isolated free-form amino acid. Usually it's not extracted from food, but it's actually synthesized in the chemical laboratory. And synthesized, they test it, and it's very pure, so there aren't really any contaminations. I know we don't, the idea of something being synthetic versus being natural, it's a natural part of food and protein. And certainly you can get benefits from serotonin-like benefits from food. For instance, whey protein contains an amino acid called cysteine. And cysteine is another precursor for serotonin. So if you don't like the use of a chemically synthesized amino acid, which we can debate that back and forth, then you could use something like whey protein. It's a nice source of protein coming from milk. And milk has other calming elements in it as well. Although we used to think it certainly has the calcium, and it has some peptides in it, which are also calming. And it also has some whey protein, especially if it's a more of a raw milk type of a deal. So I would assume that raw goat's milk, for instance, which is quite popular as an ingredient with pet food, would also contain some of the tryptophan. But I would look to a nutraceutical company that has a good reputation, has been around a long time. There's a number of them. Now is one. Douglas Labs is another. There's a number of them out there, and they create good quality products that are tested and clean, and that would be one source to get tryptophan. So my mushroom relaxed chews, I tend to get into this thing. The relaxed chews, though, what I did was I used 2 mushrooms that are known to have calming properties. One is called lion's mane, and maybe some of your folks have heard about lion's mane before. It's gotten to be a very popular mushroom in North America because we're such a stressed out population, but it also has been found to be good
Yes.
for memory loss or for improving memory and cognitive deficits, and in general, just a de-stressing kind of an effect. And some of these dogs, for instance, that have these senior dogs that have this geriatric senility, we call it canine cognitive disorder. We see it in cats as well. And we've seen benefits anecdotally. We don't have a study yet, but we're looking at it with this canine cognitive disorder as well. And it seems like that works pretty well. The reishi has been used for centuries by Zen masters as a meditation aid. So I use those two initially as the mushrooms that would be of the best long-term benefit, because mushrooms really work the best not when they're used once, but when they're used daily on a regular basis for weeks and weeks, months and months, years and years. They have their best effect. But I added to this a tryptophan, the amino acid tryptophan, and I added to it the amino acid theanine, and I added to it the amino acid taurine, all of which have a beneficial effect on nervous system in terms of calming it down and relaxing it. And so the combination has been very good. I also have catnip in there. I just do the whole kitchen sink: catnip and valerian. I've got passion flower, and I've got lemon balm in there, and it works really well because the amino acids can produce more of an immediate calming effect, and then over time the mushrooms kick in and maintain that. And I have found that if you combine the chews with CBD, that the effect is even more profound. And one reason is we found that the CBD, both CBD and the lion's mane and the reishi, will both they both stimulate the same membrane receptors, that because cells have these receptors that molecules dock into, and then it sets up the chemical machinery in the cell to kick out certain kinds of proteins or amino acids or things like that. And we know that both the mushrooms and the CBD stimulate the same membrane receptors to produce the same tryptophan response. So that's where we see that there's an even more profound response when you use both together, because they have their own special receptors, I think, that they dock at. And so that helps to give a more comprehensive response. So yeah, stuff like this would be really good around the holidays. But here's what I think. And here's what I've been recommending to my clients for their critters, is that you need to start early. And really, if you've got an anxious animal to begin with, my recommendation is to get them on some sort of an anxiolytic program, which might be this stuff, it might be some other things that you're choosing. Look at diet as well. We know that ultra processed foods equals kibble, and processed foods in general and junk food in general causes hyperactivity in kids. It can cause hyperactivity in our pets as well. So what we feed has a very strong effect on behavior, on the nervous system, and looking at feeding a better quality food, maybe looking at a TCM approach in terms of using a TCM diet that it can be used to treat whatever the TCM diagnosis is that's creating the excitement in the animal, maybe excessive fire or something like that. And you want to use a cooling diet. And so, but we want to start early. And so I keep digressing. So for a dog that has anxiety, we want to use a base level of these anti-anxiety supplements. And then when we get to a moment, let's say Thanksgiving, then maybe a day before, we may want to markedly increase the amount that we're giving in order to increase the effect, so we don't have that baseline anymore. This would be true for dogs that have this thunder phobia, this fear in the summertime of fireworks or loud noises that we can't really predict when they're going to happen. We need to have kind of a baseline level of reducing anxiety, and then we can add to that some more stuff to when we actually have an event that creates a lot of anxiety.
Right on. And that's the thing too, is that if the gut's out of whack because the dog's been eating a highly processed food, And the microbiome is essentially what's making 90% of the neurotransmitters. If we're not addressing that along with giving the thing that relieves the symptom, then it's going to be extremely difficult to get to the base of what's creating a problem. And
Plus,
that's been my approach. Yeah.
plus maybe grandpa is feeding them stuff underneath the table,
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and so you get all that stuff too. So and then getting back to the original thing that I was talking about, maybe even talk to your guests about not feeding your pets from the table food or things like that. Maybe making from your meal, which I'm sure is a very good quality, healthy meal, taking little pieces of that in proportions that are appropriate for your animal's nutritional needs and giving them a little portion of that in a way that's controlled and maybe is separate from where the people are, or maybe feed your dogs a little bit of that at the same time that the meal comes on, so they're not sitting at the table drooling and begging and being annoying or being cutely annoying. But those are things that
Right
I
on.
would suggest people pay attention to around the holidays.
Right on. And Melissa asked a question about what's your favorite mushroom for IBD support or gut support?
And this is why I call that book "There's a Mushroom for That," because
Amen.
what is the mushroom for that? And so we have so few studies in pets. It's very frustrating. I work with in Real Mushrooms has three practitioners. I'm the veterinary practitioner. We've got a naturopath, and we've got an Australian herbalist, and they've got all these studies in humans and stuff. Don't have those many in pets. But anecdotally, from what we've heard, and I'm in touch with hundreds and hundreds of veterinarians who use this stuff, hundreds, at least 100, that use this stuff, lion's mane is what I would recommend looking at for IBD, possibly combining that with another mushroom called tremella. Both of them have a good effect on the microbiome. They both have a good effect on reducing inflammation in the bowel, and they also have a good effect on that brain gut axis. That is so important that we understand now. As Ruth was saying, the gut produces these neurotransmitters. This is part of that link that we have between the brain and the gut, and it's linked through the microbiome and what it can produce. And certainly feeding food that's not appropriate for the animal could unbalance the microbiome, which could also alter the secretion of these neurotransmitters, which could change behavior or increase their excitement. So these are all things you need to think about in addition to wondering what you're cooking and is your house clean, or is all your company coming. There's a lot of stuff going on during the holidays, and pets are only one part of it. But of course, for Ruth and myself, pets are 100% of
That's the
everything.
main part. Yeah, right on. So yeah, and you all, I put links in the comments here for the Real Mushrooms, Tremella, the Lion's Mane, and also I pulled together a package that's a long-term and short-term strategy for stress
Mhm.
that incorporates several products from Real Mushrooms, as well as some probiotics, omega-3 fatty acids, and teaching you how to cook for your pets, because I think it's really critical to be able to get to the root of the issue.
Mhm.
And we can give supplements like we would give medications, but if we're not doing dive and looking at the root cause, we won't get a long-term fix. We'll just be applying a bandage. So I think
Now,
that's
Ruth,
critical to think about too. Mhm.
you have calming products on your online store, don't you? You should, yeah, you should also
Well, and I'm dropping there. So because we've got all the mushroom relax chews that you formulated, and then I put together a bundle of stuff so that people would be able to have everything in one go. I used ergo in lieu of the lion's mane, but relax chews, reishi, to
well,
help
yeah,
kind of cool things down. Yeah.
and one of the
Mhm.
things, one of the reasons why lion's mane is so good is because it also is one. It has some decent amounts of ergo in it, and I would actually like to get a study going in canine cognitive disorder with lion's mane and ergo together, or just ergo alone. So many studies I want to do in so little time.
Right on. And that makes sense because then there goes the ergo along with the complete food source to take it in. So that's awesome.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right on.
Well, and ergo is found in the food, so it's if they call it the longevity vitamin now.
Yeah. And when we were at the AHVMA, Lee Carroll gave a talk about about the effect of ergo on people that was pre-Alzheimer's, and
Mhm,
the results were really quite remarkable in
mhm.
terms of improving cognitive function abilities.
And
So that
this canine cognitive disorder, I can get it out, actually is really a doggy Alzheimer's because they can also measure an increase in plaque formation in the brain with this condition. So really it is doggy Alzheimer's. And these studies in humans with early Alzheimer's were quite remarkable as far as their benefit. And it doesn't cure it, unfortunately, but it does help to modify it and slow it down. Also with Parkinson's, which we don't really have a comparable disease in our critters, but MS is close to that.
right on. It's so fascinating to me that all of a sudden the field of mushrooms have really taken off in terms of understanding them not only as functional foods, but in using them as a medicinal compound. And so maybe that would be a good time to talk about optimal ways to provide mushrooms in terms of a supplement format, like so that the maximum of the medicinal properties are preserved and absorbed into the body.
Yeah, and actually, if people are preparing homemade food and doing some cooking, we also could look at and or maybe feeding themselves mushrooms. We could also look at giving some edible mushrooms that have been cooked that maybe you've got at the grocery store as part of your pet's diets as well. There's been some epidemiological studies in humans again, where they found that even just eating one button mushroom a week contributed immeasurably to cognitive benefits in healthy people, and two mushrooms a week contributed to cognitive benefits in people who already had some cognitive deficits. But if we're going to be giving mushrooms with real, and there's different companies out there that have their mushrooms in different formats. Real mushrooms primary format is as an extracted powder that's been extracted and concentrated. And we standardize all of our products have stated the amount of beta glucans, which are one of the more active ingredients in mushrooms that help to support immune function. And we list those amounts on the label. But most mushrooms have a fairly narrow range of potency. And I've tried to simplify it because the dosage question turns out to be very complicated, and a lot of pet parents stumble over it. Even a lot of vets stumble over it. And I made it very numerical and it was pretty complicated. I took the individual beta glucan content of each mushroom and used that based on body weight and severity of condition. Now I don't now I've made it more simple. And so when we look at the powder that we can get in pouches, we would look at an eighth of a teaspoon of powder as a baseline for every 10 pounds of body weight. And that would be like a wellness amount that we would give. But as the problems increase, like if, for instance, we might want to have something more relaxing, we want to use a slightly higher dosage. So maybe we would do an eighth of a teaspoon of powder twice a day. And then if we start to get into really serious stuff like cancer, then we might want to go a quarter of a teaspoon per 10 pounds of body weight twice daily. That's quite a bit of mushroom, but honestly, when you're dealing with critical problems, the more you give, the better it's going to work. And the longer you give it, especially, the better it's going to work. A short term with a large amount for a short term isn't nearly as good as a small amount long term. You really want to look at long-term benefits with mushrooms. We're so impatient as a culture, and we think of mushrooms as drugs. They're not. They're superfoods. They're just a really super part to add to our diet that's going to have multiple benefits. Now, if it comes in a capsule form, in some of our products, we've got smaller capsules. Each capsule would be, and these are our pet labeled products, would be an eighth of a teaspoon. But our larger capsule would be more like a quarter of a teaspoon. So the capsules just give you a metered measurement that you can use. You can open the capsules and sprinkle it in, but it's so much easier just to measure it. I don't like those pouches, and we're trying to get some jars with lids on them for pets, and we're also looking at getting into the equine space. And so in barns and things, you don't want to have these open pouches. You want to have something nice and that can close easily to keep it safe. But what I do with my pouches is when I open them up, I cut across the top, and then I have little mason jars that I put them in, and I put a little teaspoon measuring thing and put a top on it. That that makes it, they store better, they're less messy, and it works better for me. But some mushroom products come as tinctures, and tinctures can be effective, but you can't get as much potency in that liquid measurement, just because if it's a glycerite, let's say they use vegetable glycerin as a preservative and as a flavor and as a vehicle, then 50% of all of everything in there has to be that glycerin. So the tinctures, I think, are much better for smaller animals because they don't need as high a dosage. And some companies don't really make mushrooms, but they claim that they do. And this is because there's a trend in the mushroom industry to not to cultivate to grow the mycelium on grain, which is the first step that we do in cultivating mushrooms. But instead of taking that that mycelium on the grain, which we call grain spawn, and then inoculating the final substrate, which usually is dead or dying wood, could be compost or leaf litter, they just dry it and powder it, and they put a picture of a mushroom on the bottle and call it a mushroom, when in fact it's really mycelium grown on grain. It's very much like tempeh. Now, I think it does have some value, but it's not a mushroom. Just like I think tempeh has value because of all of these secondary metabolites that happen from that fermentation of the bean or from the fermentation of the grain. So if you want a mushroom, you should be sure that you're getting a mushroom, a real mushroom, a mushroom from a company that can show you that they're actually using they actually have fruiting body mushrooms in there, not mycelium, not mycelial biomass or organic grain. You shouldn't see any of that in a true mushroom product if that's what you're looking for.
And that makes sense. If you're after the medicinal function of these things, then it does pay to make sure you get the fruiting body. And Audrey's asking a great question. Does it matter what country the mushrooms actually come from? And there's a lot of discussion around this.
I think that the important thing is how the mushroom's grown and how the mushroom analyzes it once you've harvested it. You could have a really great country growing it and still have problems with that. So you really also do need to look at what analysis has been done of that harvested and processed mushroom. Usually we want to look at it actually in an analysis from the product itself, because there are places where contamination can go into the product even after the mushroom's been grown and extracted, just in terms of the powdering of it or the filling of the capsules or whatever other part of the process is being used, making them into soft chews. You need to look at the analysis for that. The mushrooms that Real Mushrooms makes are grown and cultivated in China. Give you full transparency on that. And we're proud of that fact. China grows 85% of all the mushrooms and has been growing it, has more expertise in that area, has been growing it for thousands of years. When the founders of our company wanted to ramp up the amount of medicinal mushrooms they were producing to a level that they could supply it to many companies so it could be more widely distributed, they went to China. And then in China, they taught the growers USDA organic standards. So mushrooms are all third-party tested. They're all USDA certified. They pass all those tests. In that case, we're very suspicious of China. I am as well. There's certainly geopolitical reasons that we're looking at currently, but everyone goes back to the 2007 melamine pet food adulteration problem. And that was where a lot of our initial distrust of things from China began. And I share that with everyone. I've practiced in the middle of that and was very well aware of that. And in many ways, it was a cloud with a silver lining, because it drove so many pet parents to learn more that the big box pet foods are really something that may not be what they're advertising them to be, and has led, I think, to a lot of what we're seeing now in the holistic coaching and all the natural feeding approaches, the many product lines that are out there that are less processed foods available commercially. Sometimes bad things actually can provide good things as well. I'm not trying to minimize the pain and suffering and loss that people had back then. So anyway, that's my answer. You can grow them anywhere, and you can grow them.
And I think, yeah, and I think you're back to getting a COA, getting a certificate of analysis, and that's going to tell you, because mushrooms, like cannabis, are bioaccumulators. If there's stuff in the mushrooms that shouldn't be there, you're going to see that on the COA. So I think
Absolutely.
that's critically important. And I will say we could you as you said, you can grow mushrooms anywhere, and you may really like the country where they're being grown, but if they're not grown properly and the soil has not been researched as for contamination, et cetera, or the substrate for the mushrooms, you can end up with the same problems. So again, I think that companies that are forthcoming with their certificates of analysis are going to help you be able to select a really quality product, regardless of the formula to use.
And I will say that the science of mushroom cultivation has really advanced markedly in the last 10, 20 years. And these days, you really can grow them anywhere because the mushrooms that we grow in China primarily are grown in these large outdoor shade houses, like greenhouses. And many of them are in the original areas. Like, for instance, our reishi farm is where the original reishis were found in China thousands of years ago. So it's actually the perfect climate for growing that. But these days, a lot of people are making all of these are growing them in warehouses on these large racks in bags, and it's doesn't seem quite as natural as growing on stumps in the ground, but it's nonetheless works. You use a wood product in the bag that gets myceliated after you put the grain spawn in it, and they can actually produce a much larger amount. And so we're seeing more of these independent companies in North America that are starting to grow mushrooms this way. And I think that it's good. It's good to see diversification in the mushroom industry and an increase in competition because I think it will wind up increasing the quality ultimately of the product to the consumer.
Said. I think, gosh, we've gone all over the place. This has been so much fun, Rob. I really enjoy this. And so there's a couple of other questions out there. Maybe we can tackle them real quick and then wind things up. Diane, I think we got you covered on the cognitive issue. We revamped on that in terms of lion's mane. Yep. And then this is where ergothionine, I think, would be appropriate too.
Absolutely. In fact, I've got
Cool.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And then what about for more painful situations or neurologic situations, especially in the rear end? What's the mushroom for that, Doc Rob?
Mushrooms have been found to have analgesic properties, pain relieving properties. And they've also been found to have properties that help with nerve function and especially neuropathy. I think that certainly the use of mushrooms when you're having a neurologic problem in the back legs is a good thing. I would not use them as your only approach to that, of course. And neurologic problems in dogs' back legs can be a variety of things. Let's maybe say disc, maybe it's some sort of a disc. That's a deal. Looking at acupuncture, I think whenever you have a neurologic problem, I think acupuncture is absolutely indicated. And adding to that a mushroom such as lion's mane and perhaps a mushroom such as cordyceps or reishi, which both have the best research as analgetics, including maitake. But I think all mushrooms have this same anti-inflammatory property. Some just because we don't have studies in other mushrooms is not doesn't mean that they don't have that property. It just means that property hasn't been studied in that mushroom. So when I make a recommendation for a mushroom, I have to base it on personal experience and also on what has been published in terms of what I know the science to be telling us about it. I would look at those mushrooms, certainly fish oil, and CBD also is really good for neurologic issues as well. And good luck with that because those can be
Right on.
quite difficult. They can be painful, they can be disabling, they can be difficult, especially if there's loss of function of your bowel or your urinary bladder, urinary sphincter. They can be difficult to manage in the household as well.
Amen. Yeah. And then what about dogs with a short attention span? And somebody said this 10 years ago and I laughed, but I think it really is a problem.
Yeah, you mean like ADHD.
Ooh.
Yeah. Well, that's where I would also suggest the lion's mane because I think that part of the CCD thing is also an ADHD type. And we're dealing with all these abbreviations, but I would look to lion's mane for that. And I would probably look to CBD as well. A lot of people take CBD for sleep, but it's not because it's a sedative. It doesn't put you to sleep. THC might, but CBD doesn't. And what CBD does is it orders your thoughts. It helps to organize your thoughts more. And so that's where I think we have this short attention span is our mind is always jumping from one thought to another. So CBD, lion's mane, I think would be good choices there.
Awesome. Cool. Dr. Rob, this has been so much fun. And thank you for coming, sharing your wisdom with us. And if you all have not gotten Dr. Rob's book as yet, you need to go do it, because you will have this amazing wealth of information in a book form. And I think several of my coaches, Melissa, and has read your book and has just found it to be amazing. But this is a great way to get information that's researched, that is factual, that you know will end up supporting your pet. And for those of you that are not following Dr. Rob, so if you go, there's a mushroom for that. I'm going to share screen one more time so you can take a look at it. I dropped the Amazon link in the comments for you as well. But this is part of Dr. Rob's life work. So it's an amazing book. I think it's something that we need to support him with as well, because the volume and the quality of the information there is just incredible. So there's a mushroom for that, Diane. I hope that helps. So Dr. Rob, thank you so much. Where can folks find you? I know you're working for Real Mushrooms and providing their clinical support.
I do. I work for Real Mushrooms, and I'm available through them. In fact, tonight, this is a very unique day for me, because it's got bookends of Q&As. I'm starting my day off here with you, Ruth, doing the Q&A, kind of a Q&A type of an approach, definitely a live approach. And then once a month, usually the third Thursday of each month, we do a live Q&A for Real Mushrooms. Anyone can ask me anything. I love it. It's Stump the Stars. And you can usually find links through through the Real Mushrooms Facebook page. The Real Mushrooms Pets Facebook page is where you can get in there and get the links, and those are a lot of fun. I have my own website. It's Well Pet Dispensary, where I sell my own branded CBD products, and I sell some Real Mushrooms products, and I sell some other stuff for some other companies. I've designed products. So I do a lot of product formulation, and so my website has a lot of my originals, my OGs on there. And I'm also available. That's a good place to contact me, but I'm looking to create more of a platform where I can have interaction. I'm not that great with social media. I'm really not happy with social media. I'm trying to find some other ways that we can still communicate in an easy and mostly free fashion. So I think the information is out there.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming and attending. Great questions, and happy holidays. But now you know what you need to do to get prepared for them.
Absolutely.
So take good care until next, and actually happy Thanksgiving next week. I don't think we don't have a regularly scheduled broadcast, but I may just pop in for the heck of it anyway. So until then, take good care. Give your pups and your kitties a kiss for us, and we'll see you soon.
Happy holidays.